everyone. Today I want to share how informatics can give you a fun and fulfilling career. There are actually more than two pathways when it comes to your career in radiology. In fact, there are many, and I want to share with you some of them actually today. So Confucius once said, choose a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. And when I was at Penn, I remember there's one neuroradiologist attending. I think many people at Penn know. When asked, how she was doing, she responded by saying, living the dream, living the dream. And I'm going to share with you one alternative pathway that was shaped by informatics. And for me, taking that road that's less traveled by many made all the difference in my life. And I can truly, appreciate the statement, living the dream as a result. Now, uh, I have to say this, alternative pathway, it may not be for everyone. But at a minimum, hopefully it may, it will give you some ideas or inspiration to design your own path when it comes to your own career. So let me first share my own personal background. Now, when I was a first year resident, during our musculoskeletal radiology rotations, we had a particular job we had to do. And it was always the first year's responsibility. And the job was this. You see, back then, we had two DEXA scanners at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was a resident. One was from GE Lunar, and the other one was from Hologic, and they were in two separate buildings. So our job was every day at 3 o'clock, you stop whatever you were doing at that time and walk to each scanner and pick up the paper printouts from all the cases that were done that day. And then after we made that long trip to multiple different places, we would come back to our own workstation and would start manually dictating into DEXA report templates in the reporting solution the numbers we saw in the printouts. So, minus 2.7, next field, osteoporosis, next field, and so on. And now I thought, I was thinking, as I was spending hours doing this every single day, I thought this was the dumbest thing that we have to do this. Because, what you were doing in this essentially is, taking that digital data that's coming out of the DEXA scanners and then converting that to analog, which is a paper printout, and then convert that back to digital using speech recognition. And, if the speech recognition software got the wrong numbers into the report, well, we'll get an earful from our endocrinologist, the very next day, and they'd be very unhappy. And for me, this didn't make a whole lot of sense to me because, it's a colossal waste of my time, right? Why would you take something digital and then, convert it to analog and then, convert back to, digital? And we were spending literally 2 hours every day doing this. And no one wanted to do it. And that's why it became the first year's responsibility. So, the MSK section jokingly called it the DEXA Fellowship. And, when I asked the manufacturers, they had no solutions. They said, look, this is the way it is. And so I decided to figure out how to solve the problem on my own. And, I found out, very quickly by looking at the actual solution. I actually walked to the scanner and I just looked at it, how does this thing work? And they were just using mail merge technique in Microsoft Word using Visual Basic. So what I did was I taught myself just enough Visual Basic because I didn't know anything about it at the time to bypass the printing process and put the digital reports directly into a shared folder that the residents can open individually, copy paste, put it into report, sign off. Now, Bill Boone, one of the residents at Penn at the time, said, hey, you know what, but if you like doing this kind of stuff, then you should do an informatics fellowship. So I did. And so after my residency, I did 4 days of MSK fellowship, Monday through Thursday. And then every Friday, I would take Amtrak down to Baltimore to do 1 day of imaging informatics fellowship every Friday. Now, I did mine at the University of Maryland and Baltimore VA under Dr. Ali Siegel, Kansidiki, Navio Salter, all giants in the world of imaging informatics. And when I did my fellowship, a part of it was to learn not only the concepts, like, what is PACS or RIS or DICOM or HL7, but also get hands-on experience with things like how to write a SQL query and, construct them then in the real world setting. And so not just learning about what it is, we had hands-on, experience and practice. And you see, because of the people that were there, a lot of vendors visited with their ideas to get feedback. And I watched how these guys would evaluate the SEC and critique these ideas. And I learned a lot by watching them. Now, during that year, I taught myself how to code PHP using books. And I noticed how bad Google was about giving information I needed as a radiologist. They're much, much better now, but back then, it had abysmal results when looking for radiology images. For example, when you look for, say, mesothelioma, you get, mostly law firm sites. So I decided to teach myself enough PHP to create a radiology-centric search engine. So I made Outlook during my fellowship year, which later became my first company. When I was a resident fellow, where you guys are, I had absolutely zero interest in becoming an academic radiologist. In fact, I was like 110% into becoming a private practice radiologist. And so right after I finished my training, I actually became a teleradiologist for a very large teleradiology company. Now, just like in any job, there were pros and cons to being a teleradiologist, which is another entirely separate talk by itself. Work efficiency that I saw during those years affected how I approach radiologist workflow and efficiency even to this day. But after 2 years, I decided, you know what, I don't think this is for me. So I decided to become a full-time academic radiologist at Penn. And yes, even though I was, completely against becoming an academic radiologist, I actually became one in the end. So here's another lesson for you guys. You never know where your life will take you. So just be aware of that, and it's okay to change your minds. And I eventually, went up the academic ranks all the way up to becoming the interim division chief at a relatively young age. And aside from clinical side of things, it was really my informatics training that took my career to a completely different path. And that's why I wanted to share this experience with you. And even when I was at Penn, it was my informatics training that helped me to work on many projects within the department that led to me becoming holding various positions within the department when it comes to informatics. And I also spent a lot of time volunteered for societies like SIIM, doing things like reviewing papers, abstracts, and becoming a member of various committees. So here's another career advice for you guys. And this advice is applicable regardless of what specialty you choose. So, even if you decide not to do anything remotely related to informatics, which is you want to really volunteer and get involved in these societies and, make connections, because they will all eventually help you. So networking is so important. And it's when you're young that, you provide your, you put in that sweat equity and they will all pay off in the end. So I started my first company that made the search engine Outlook when I was an imaging informatics fellow. And then I started my second company, Montage Healthcare Solutions, in search, data mining, and analytics when I was an academic radiologist at Penn. Now, the Montage Healthcare Solutions later ended up acquiring the first company, and the Montage company itself was later acquired by Nuance Communications, where I worked as their CMIO, Chief Medical Information Officer, until the end of 2019. I think many of you guys are familiar with Nuance because of the, I think many of you guys use their Power Sky solution to generate radiology reports. So while this shows you a sort of a rather atypical career path for a radiologist, I can tell you it's been a really exciting and very fun journey for me. And it also shows you that there are other tracks than simply, academic versus private practice, because this is not one of those two pathways, right? And that's the beauty of informatics and why you should pay attention to, informatics. So in the end, I want you to remember that there's more than, one pathway. This allows me to, obviously this pathway allowed me to, also, have travel and have a lot of fun, before the pandemic, and I can't wait to go back to it. But I showed you very early on that, many of you guys might think you have only one, maybe two, maybe three different career pathways, but I will tell you that you actually have multiple, and don't be afraid to take the risk. Sometimes you can see that, I changed my course multiple times, more than once, and it's okay. But the journey should be fun. And if it's not, then you should really get off it. And regardless of the path you choose, your goal should be something you're passionate about. And if you're not passionate about it, don't waste your time. Life is too short for that, as you can see, especially with all the things that we experienced in the recent, months. And it's passion that will get you through the rough patches, and have a determination to follow through your passion with grit. And by the way, this book entitled Grit by Angela Duckworth is a terrific book that I recommend very highly.